Hello and welcome back to Misfit Media. I'm your host Delta and I go by Viva with pronouns. In this episode I will be answering the most googled questions about borderline. Just to explain it again, I typed in stuff like is borderline or are borderline people, and then I will pick out some questions and answer them. So let's get into it. Is borderline genetic? People do reckon that there's some kind of genetic component about this because it often occurs in families, but it's not entirely known where exactly it comes from. Is borderline a disability? Yeah, so many of the traits of borderline are absolutely disabling, and personally I absolutely consider it to be part of my disability. Is borderline neurodivergent? Yes, because the brain of a borderline person processes stuff differently than a neurotypical. Our brains simply work different than what is considered the norm, so yes, we are neurodivergent. Is borderline bipolar? No, it's not, but a lot of people think this because borderline also comes with mood swings, but with borderline, those mood swings are actually more reactive, whereas with bipolar, they are not. But of course, someone can be both. Is borderline a mental illness? Yes. It is. Many of us definitely feel like the term mentally ill fits us because we simply do not feel well a lot of the time. Is borderline real? I mean, yes, I do not know why that is a question. It is absolutely real. Too real sometimes, if you ask me. Is borderline curable? There are people who successfully live with their traits so that they don't negatively interfere with their lives, but it is still an ongoing effort. The brains of borderline people will never entirely function the way that neurotypicals do, so you cannot cure us from our neurodivergence, but yeah, we can live with it, we can heal, we can cope better, but that is not the same as a cure. Are borderline people abusive? We are more likely to be abused than be the abusers, but of course anyone can be an abuser. It just doesn't mean that borderline people are more likely to be abusers than anyone else. That is very much not true. Are borderline people trustworthy? Yes, I don't see why not. We have been hurt so much in the past usually that we actually keep our words, and if you treat us with respect and respect our needs, you can absolutely trust us. Are borderline people dangerous? Dangerous to ourselves, yes. Dangerous to other people? Rarely. For example, if someone is recklessly driving or something, of course that will put other people at risk as well, but we are not dangerous in the sense that we are just randomly violent towards people. That is not us. Are borderline people self-aware? It very much depends. Personally, I was not self-aware for a really long time until I got out of a bad environment and into living with my partner, who pointed out all of my behavior, and that helped me become more self-aware. So we absolutely have the ability to be self-aware. Are borderline people cruel? No. To ourselves maybe, but we are no more or less cruel than anyone else. Does borderline go away? As I said before, it is an ongoing effort to cope and live with the traits of borderline. It does not go away in that sense that someone does not have anything anymore. If they are not struggling anymore, it just means they are successfully living with their traits. But it doesn't go away in the sense that it is completely gone from your life. Does borderline get better? I have heard of people who struggle less naturally, even without therapy, just by getting older. I have heard about people who struggle less by the time they're like 40 or something. So there might be some hope, even if you cannot access therapy. Does borderline affect memory? It can, because one trait of borderline is dissociation, which is not something that everyone experiences, but some do, and that can absolutely affect memory. For example, if something happens while you're dissociated, you might not remember after. Also, borderline people are under a lot more stress all the time, or most of the time, than people who are not borderline, and stress can affect memory. Do borderline people have empathy? A lot of borderline people apparently have hyper-empathy. I do not, but apparently most of us actually have above average levels of empathy. Do borderline people feel remorse? Yeah. We tend to feel so much remorse in a way that almost breaks us apart. Do borderline people gaslight? Again, gaslighting is abuse. We are no more or less likely to be abusive than anyone else. So, of course, a borderline person can gaslight someone, but that does not mean that we are more likely to do so. Do borderline people cheat? We are not more or less likely to cheat than anyone else. Do borderline people lie? With most borderline people being abuse survivors and lots of us being taught that telling the truth puts us in danger, some borderline people actually end up compulsively lying. But that is not all of us, and that is not good, but it is a trauma response. It is not out of malice. It is a coping mechanism from a time where you were in danger that is now no longer needed. Do borderline people cry a lot? It really depends on the person. I, for one, do cry a lot. We obviously do have extreme emotions, but it doesn't mean that everyone actually cries. Do borderline people play the victim? No, we do not, because we are victims. Most of us are victims, are survivors of abuse. Traumatized people are not playing the victim by still struggling, by still having trauma responses. That is not what this is. Can borderline be caused by trauma? Yeah. Apparently there are some borderline people who did not experience childhood trauma, but for most of us it is actually caused by that, plus some genetic component. Can borderline be mistaken for autism? Apparently it can. There are a lot of autistic people who have been misdiagnosed with borderline, and I wouldn't be surprised if it might happen the other way around as well, especially in women or anyone who is seen as a woman. Can borderline turn into narcissism? That is not how personality disorders work. You either already have both, or at least traits of both, or you don't. It may look like it's turning into narcissism simply because there's already a lot of overlap, but it doesn't mean that a personality disorder just randomly turns into a different personality disorder. That is not how stuff works. Can borderline people change? Change what? Change what? Change ourselves? I mean, yeah, we can learn to cope with our traits, but it is not only us who are the problem. So why is it only us that need to change? Why can't people also meet our needs? Can borderline people be happy? So many of us are short-term happy a lot, actually, and long-term happiness obviously is possible if we learn how to cope with our traits. Can borderline people have healthy relationships? To speak from personal experience, yes. Yes, we can. With the right support, with someone who understands us, yes, we can. Can borderline people control their behavior? Yeah, it is harder for us to do it than for other people because the part in our brain that controls impulses works differently. So we actually have less impulse control, which makes it harder to control our behavior. But that is something that can be learned. Can borderline people love you? Yes. Most of us have so much love to give. Can borderline people give you borderline? Unless one or both of your parents also have borderline and are passing it down with their genes, or if your parent or parents are both borderline and abusers, that would be the only way that a borderline person can also give you borderline. But it's not fucking contagious. Can borderline people date borderline people? Of course they can, and it might even be better because they would understand the other person more than someone who is not borderline. And this have been all the questions about borderline that I will be answering in this episode. If you enjoyed this episode or even the entire podcast, please consider giving me a 5-star review anywhere that's possible. For everything else, such as Misfit Media subscriptions, my social media, the Misfit Media Discord, the podcast transcripts, my email, sending me an anonymous question, or sending me a voice message, all of that will be in the link tree in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, be safe.